All right. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. It's the WebAssembly filters meeting for August 30th, Monday. Heck of a meeting to kick off the week. So there's a number of you that are on the phone. There are most of you, many of you represented in the meeting minutes. If you don't see your name, please drop it in. And we've got a couple items that are queued up from last week. So it's nice. Last week we had, unbelievably, we had the foresight to create what would be this week's agenda. That seems like a wise thing to do. So we'll put a next week down here. A couple of things. And by the way, now is the time to enter in a couple of your topics if they aren't represented. So drop them in. Assuming that they are, though, we'll get started in no particular order. Soham is our first at bat. And so, yeah, Soham, do you want to take us through this?
Sure. Let me share my screen. And so I believe you guys can see screen recording that I'm sharing. So this is with regards to editing configurations on mesh map, be it a workload or any filter that's dropped on a workload. So currently on my system, I have Istio adapter running, so I can see all the Istio components. So if I open, I would be able to see all of the Istio components that are given by the Istio adapter. Now I drop an Istio mesh, and as you can see, I get a tooltip which asks for some settings which would be applied to the workload that's dropped over here. And now after I close this, these settings are basically saved in mesh map, and you can anytime recall these settings. And if you ever want to maybe edit, maybe change something, you can always just hold on to the node, and then you'll see the context menu. We call it context menu, this thing appearing. And if you just go over there and leave your mouse, you would see the settings menu open again, and you can just edit anything that you want and save it again. That's the first part. The second part would be, yeah, so now I would be searching for Envoy filter. I would be dropping this Envoy filter onto the Istio mesh, and as you can see, another pop-up opened for the Envoy filter. And Envoy filter has its own set of settings that you can basically specify. So once I add a few fields, as you can see, and close the whole button. Now, if I want to edit any of those settings, what I can do is I can just click on the filter that I just dropped, and the settings menu will again open, and then you can edit any of those fields again, like I would be showing you. And yeah, the same thing. If you close it, they are saved again. That's the update from my end.
Yeah, who's got comments on that? There's some questions to get the discussion going. Is this intuitive? So the context menu, that circle, that users can pull that up by doing two things. So right-clicking on the node, or
no, it's just holding on, like pressing on the node. That's the only case.
Okay, so long clicking on the node, I guess, is that.
Yeah.
Okay, what happens if they right-click on a node today?
Nothing.
Okay. Huh. That's it.
We can always have something like an options menu, like something like this that opens up when you right click on a node or anywhere on the canvas. That is a capability which we haven't exploited yet, but that is possible.
Okay. I think good. Then I am intending for that to be a soft suggestion as food for thought. Like, yeah, and so I'll just speak for myself, and that is that, like, I enjoy the subtle nature of something like a long click, like that the interaction can be so sophisticated that it takes into account, well, like things that weren't conventionally true of older computers or older style computing, was that like it couldn't tell the difference between holding something down versus, or that generally wasn't the case. Is that's nice. It also does mean that I think this is a fact, or like would be true, that it would be less discoverable, or fewer people would happen upon it because it's just not as common of a style of interaction. And so would it be bad if that was available through right clicking and through long clicking? I think part of the thing to maybe state as we think about that is whether or not one of the goals is to have this mesh map available through mobile, and because that has an effect on how people, they're not using a mouse, they're using their fingers. So then actually it is much more common to have a long click on a mobile interface. So food for thought. So
Yeah, I guess we can have both. I'll make an action item for having the right click also, and have all of these 4 things that are there, namely copy, delete, clone, or duplicate, and edit.
one other comment. Yeah, go ahead, Magna.
How about a double click instead, maybe? Is there any other function being used for double click? If it is free, then maybe you can go with double click too. Will that be bad?
Yeah, if you take a look at we haven't exploited double click, by the way, but in my opinion, it's better if we have options and right click. Like that's general convention. If you right click, you see options. Yeah. But yeah, double click also works.
Another small UI thing, more of UI UX thing. So once we open the edit option, like we are just getting a close option, and there's another option. Yeah, delete and close, right? So
yeah.
Instead of, so it's getting automatically saved. Will it be better if we put the save option there instead of cross? I mean, to imply that it's being saved.
Yeah, actually the intention is that like what we want the users to think is that you don't need to go over here to save, but that that feature is not yet implemented. So in future, like probably next week, because this thing that you just suggested is actually being tracked, and probably next week or by Friday, what we'll have is once you click anywhere outside of this tooltip, the whole tooltip will just collapse and will save everything.
Okay, it will get, like, we can keep it this way, right? If the user clicks outside, then it will just get discarded, and maybe save button will actually save it. Maybe
I didn't get you. If it gets discarded,
discards the changes that are made. So maybe user is doing he made some couple of changes, but he feels like maybe let's keep it how it was before. Then that kind of thing will be handy, right? So if he clicks outside, then it will get discarded. But if he actually wants to save it, he'll just click on the save button.
Okay.
Else, like if it the way we are keeping it right now. So what happens that if he makes a couple of changes, then he has to change everything back to the way it was to get the old way of things. So in that sense,
that is one part of the bigger question that we haven't answered yet, is versions of having patterns itself. Probably, for example, if you take a look at Google Docs, Google Docs has versions on every edit that you make on it, right? So that is probably something on the lines of that thing. But yes, it would be good if we can have something like that right now too.
that's what I just wanted to.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I believe I will note both of them down and will add which the one that feels good.
Yeah, sure.
Another item of feedback to consider is, well, at one point when the tooltip was up, there was a short description of the component itself, and which is nice because because that type of a description can be helpful to people understand what's going on. Is there a backlog item for dealing with the description?
No, not like that. Probably the description can be sent from the backend itself, and because the description is automatically handled by the RGSF. So if we send a description from the backend, it would all automatically be shown. We don't have to have any other logic in the front end for it.
Yeah, something to this. I don't know that this is the best suggestion, but something to consider is that in the title of the tooltip, Envoy filter, we can close this out. We can remove the component. If there was a question mark with a small circle, or like an info button, that, or that you went upon hover or something that would then show the description, that might be a way of kind of marshal. Yeah.
What would be in the description though?
That, like the actual, that text that's there, that sentence or the two sentences, it would be not displayed here, but yeah.
Okay. No, we are not tracking something like that, but I'll surely write that down too. I haven't been writing either of these.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. And that might be a great, I think that's an improvement upon what we have currently. It might be that we end up arriving at a different place. And so part of Meghana's question about like, well, hey, what happens if or do we have control over double click and should that do something? It's like, yeah, it's a good question. Yes, we do. It's like, okay, well, actually, so we've got long clicks, right clicks, single clicks, double clicks, and we've got click and drag, and then we've got right click on the click and drag, the dragged collection of objects, and probably have long click and maybe double click. I don't know. Anyway, we've got a lot of clicks, and it's wonderful. And part of arriving at like clarity on what each one should do, sometimes you almost are only able to arrive at that after a lot of things are there and you can start to feel, and so anyway, one thing about a double click could be that it chooses to use that, like the edit function that you can otherwise find in the context menu. It might be that a double click just is set by default to invoke edit, like invoke one of those specific context menu actions that you would otherwise take 2 clicks to get to. And so I'm not suggesting it, I'm just sort of thinking, having a thought process out loud.
Yeah, we can also maybe have a preference to customize it.
It's like double click edit is a good thing actually. Yeah. It's intuitive also, like they're usually.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because when you think about it, it's like sometimes you use a canvas like this or an application like this, and if it's really about navigating and viewing and sort of looking at the shape and size of things, I've used some programs where you would double click and it would interpret that as like as a jump to zoom, like instead of like smoothly scrolling and zooming in, it was more like, no, I really want to dig into that thing. So I want to double click into that. And so it like comes right into view for you. In this case, that's not really what's happening here. This is a designer, and it's more about characterizing objects and interconnecting them and describing them and configuring them. And so like a double click to auto zoom doesn't make sense, but to Meghana's point, like, well, what is the core activity that someone is doing? Core activity is specifying configuration of one or more elements. And so like, okay, well, what's the activity that specifies configuration? Well, it's the edit, I think. And so, yeah. Yeah. Good. This is good. I like the, so all the feedback that your pen can handle this morning today. That's good. It's awesome. I am dissatisfied with the lack of contrast on the title bar versus the.
Well, it's changed actually. It's a week old, so the actual one looks a little bit more like this, not like this.
Oh. Yeah, a whole week's gone by, so the whole thing could be different. Okay, good.
By a week, I mean Friday.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's even worse. It's like ship time. Anyway, good, cool. Any other feedback for Soham? Soham doing it right, I guess, by the way, by bringing the recordings.
Yeah, it saves the time of debugging, because every time something is being showcased, we say, oh, I should talk.
Yeah, oops. Let me, yeah, cool. Okay. Utkarsh, are you in a place to speak to this today?
Yep. So I have already filled some details. Let me share my screen. I actually proposed that we should be saving more metadata about wasm filters. So regarding the same, I actually created an issue. It was issue number 3900. In there, I was supposed to propose that, okay, I asked to show more metadata, but what that metadata should look like. I actually created an issue about a week or two ago, but there were not much details that were added to it. Now I have actually added quite some details. That's what I'd be sharing, if I can just find it. Yeah. So I am proposing here to store more metadata associated with wasm filters. And the metadata that I'm requesting to be added when we store, basically when we process these wasm filters on with providers, is the first thing is that workload selection metadata. So the reason I'm proposing to save these is, let's say we want to do something like this. That is, all what you have to do is just add this particular label to your as a user, or maybe as an application, you just have to add this particular thing. And because this was associated with wasm filter, everything that had this label is now has basically the limit filter enabled on them. So this is one of the things that I'm proposing to save, that is workload selector. It shouldn't be it's not that I'm proposing to do it just this way, that is rate-limit.filter.mystery.io or something. It could be just app something, your name of the application. This is something I'm proposing to save. The second is actually operation, the type of operation. Although I'm referring here a URL from basically Istio's configuration. But I'm also proposing that although this particular thing is being, so if you would just go to this particular endpoint, you would see that there are certain operations that actually Istio supports. Istio's Omni filter configuration supports. That doesn't mean that every service mesh whose data plane is Omni filter is going to support the same. But having said that, because we as Mesh will be developing a construct, a super construct called Omni filter, and we'll be at the end implementing that. So we can try to bridge those gaps, which basically bridge those inconsistencies that service meshes have in their basically Omni filter implementation. So these are also the things that I'm basically suggesting to persist. The reason to persist them is, for example, we can take example of rate limit filter. We know that where rate limit filter should be added, we can just basically drop it at the end, and it doesn't matter because at the end it's just rate limiting filter. We don't have to basically we don't have to be first, or we don't have to be in middle of some other filter, we can be at any position. So we can specify add, and as a user, if you're using this particular filter, you don't have to actually specify that explicitly, because that metadata was already associated with a filter. So this is the second thing that I was proposing to include when we persist stuff. And the third is this particular object, and that is apply to and match. Apply to is basically just what particular section of on where you would want to attach it to. So let's say your filter is not HTTP filter, so you don't want to go to HTTP manager and you don't want to go to that chain. So you can basically specify that okay, I am interested in this particular section and not something else. So and this is also the reason to propose this is because as official the official version filter that will be coming, they can have these annotations, or basically they can have these metadata already in place. So as a user, you should be able to just apply it, because we know that what the best place for a particular filter was. So the things, if someone want to look at what these are, this is basically this. And again, as I was mentioning, that something could be that it might be just being implemented by Istio as service mesh and may not be available in other service meshes which are using Envoy as data plane. In that case, we'll try to bridge the gap. Actually, I checked multiple service meshes and what configuration they actually pass to the data plane. There are inconsistencies, so we will definitely have to bridge that gap. On Istio is like Istio exposes basically it exposes a lot of configuration for Envoy, so that is the reason we are referring to Istio's configuration. And the third object is just it's part of the same object, and that is match. And this is more towards that how config should look like. I can actually point to this also. So yep, this is so the thing is that it could be that we as Meshri, we know that official version filter doesn't actually works on X version of Envoy filter. So you as a user, probably if you are just clicking on the UI, you don't probably know if this version filter is going to work with certain Envoy filter or not. So if we attach that metadata already with version filters and other metadata also, then basically we can have checks on the server side that okay, is this condition being met, that is Envoy filter version 1.9, is it greater than 1.9.1 or something, because this particular version filter can be only applied to that particular version. So these are also other metadata that I'm proposing to save. Therefore there can be multiple other things that we can also save, but that would be sort of that will either get to Istio specific, or it would be way harder for us to bridge the gap. So there are things that we can configure cluster info also. That is, this is how the configuration should be dropped in. But those bridges are too far. Like it would be extremely hard to fill those kind of bridges. So these are the things that we can persist while trying our best to bridge gaps if there is inconsistencies between service meshes. At the same time, it will also allow a better user experience because a version filter is already aware. Basically, it's coming with all of this associated metadata that will help Meshri server to exactly pinpoint that how to deal with this thing, where to put it, how to put it in the basically in the inbound network or outbound network, and what are the workloads that you are interested in. So yeah, this is the overall metadata that I was actually proposing to store, other than obviously wasm binary and filter name.
Anybody have thoughts on this?
I have a question for the first point. So when you say workload selector, it's basically just defining the relation that this filter is applied to this workload, right?
In terms of although this workload is more of it's not the workload. It's not the own workloads that we have. It's more of just it's just a name that I chose, workload selector. So basically, yes, it will sort of to your point, if you're talking about that, if you drop in a Envoy filter to a certain application. So in that case, yes, what we basically, if we continue our discussion that we had earlier, that how to actually figure out, you can actually technically use the same labels that I was proposing, the ID labels, and this will work just fine.
Yeah, like for example, right now to persist filters, like mesh map is persisting filters. I don't remember showing it in the demo, but if you load another, if I had saved, or probably I didn't show it, but if you save the file that I just showed in the demo, and if you load it as a pattern file, the filter would be persisted. But right now, what I'm saving is just the ID actually as the label. Like I am probably storing an array of labels, or probably just a single label. So we would need to change that to storing the label instead of the ID.
No, so
right?
IDs, so applications that are being deployed with Meshroom, so consequently with Meshmap as application, they always get ID as label. So
yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, we have the same thing, label and ID board of the same
yeah
thing. Yeah, so cool, got it.
Yeah, well, this is it's a little bit of a tough one, where to figure out how to figure out where to draw the line between Meshery's reach and the control plane's reach. Primarily, the difficulty here lie in the fact that it's really only Istio that has. Well, or I guess I should ask this, Utkarsh, as you looked at some of the other implementations, did you see, I mean, like Istio is the only one that comes to mind that prominently supports Envoy filters. And okay, and so as such, yeah, so we need to step gingerly, I would say, because, well, because what we don't want to do is collide with the control plane capabilities. If those control planes are inevitably going to add this particular functionality, is we want to leverage what they have and not reinvent it. And that's in no way a comment toward Utkarsh and your design. You're trying to fill in the gap, and I think what we're recognizing is, like, for most of the control planes, it's an acknowledged gap that they will seek to overcome at some point. And so how do we now and so your analysis here is oriented to the goal of seeking out lowest common denominator, or minimal configuration that must be captured irrespective of what service mesh is being used. Is like, if you're going to insert a filter, like if it's the same proxy that's running in the data plane Envoy, well, universally, it can be stated that Envoy it needs this amount of info, or this certain set of criteria to run such a filter, intelligently or effectively, or like it requires this stuff anyway. So the things that you're seeing exposed in Istio's control plane is really just a manifestation of the configuration requirements that Envoy has anyway. So clearly then you would, or like any sane person would expect, that you'd see those same configuration items being exposed through other control planes if those are required. If some of those configurations are required, things like, what direction did you want to apply this filter? Traffic coming in or traffic going out? Like, how could that not be universal? Like, how could you not? And so I don't know that, like, the things that I'm saying are probably reinforcing your thought process, which is, I'll make a quick analogy to a very related concept, and that is one of firewall rules. very related to filtering in this case. It's like, hey, if you go over to and we talk about physical network switches, which, firewalls can be implemented on any of your host machines. Any of the host operating systems that you're running can implement firewall rules or other pieces of software or physical equipment. If you go to any of them, it's pretty consistent. Some of them, function slightly differently than the next, but it's pretty consistent. The fact that you're like required to fill in at least like 4 things. What's the source IP address? What's the source port number? What's the destination IP address? What's the destination port number? If you don't have those 4 things, you can't really make a firewall rule. And then any number of those manufacturers or those systems might expose any number more metadata around that to make it, to enhance the experience and differentiate. So that's part of the challenge here is like, okay, well, what things are universal and must be captured? If you don't identify an inbound and an outbound, then the assumption is it's just both, I guess. But you still might need to tell Envoy that. And to the extent that Envoy needs to be configured in that way, and that that's a universal Envoy consideration, then we got to be pretty comfortable with this proposal of capturing, that specific thing, for example. So, yeah. So how are we making? The proposal here is to include a number of configuration considerations generically, irrespective of the service mesh. Now, what helps make us, or make me anyway, or make the rest of us feel good about leaning in to specify some things that might be in conflict with how a different control plane would deal with this is if we're able to make a statement that Meshery is able to, like whether or not a service mesh supports Envoy filters itself, by virtue of the fact that it's running Envoy in its data plane, like console, for example. Console as a service mesh, it does not support, officially, it does not support people inserting WebAssembly filters. If you're running the right version of Envoy, you don't necessarily need to ask console for permission to insert a filter. Well, okay, well then that makes me feel better about defining something universal in Meshery itself, not in like in Meshery, but specific to Istio or specific to this mesh. So anyway, so good. I think we're all on a learning journey here, and so are some of the service meshes. So some of what was just discussed are good guiding principles to try to not be in a situation where we've stuck our foot in our mouth, sort of architecturally painted ourselves into a corner, where what we've written here only actually, in fact, ends up working with Istio because a service mesh did it differently in the future. Part of the question then becomes is the application binary interface, the interface between Envoy proper and these filters that it will let you specify. If we're, of that interface, if we're exposing some of those configuration items, that's probably a fairly safe bet that those are going to be universal across every mesh that uses Envoy as a data plane.
So actually, the things that we are exposing here is either mostly is there could be one concern, and that is there are some configurations which is automatically enforced by Istio, but if a service mesh is not actually basically is not even capable of doing that thing automatically, then we can actually go ahead and attempt to do that thing on our own. For example, let's say there is this configuration we are taking in proxy match. In this case, we can just quickly check if certain Envoy version is running or not, and if it is, then we can drop in or we can skip. This is something that Istio automatically does. So basically, a few configurations are there where we according to this proposal, we will have to do some of the jobs that ideally the control plane should have been doing, but because it's not, then we be doing so. That could be one of the concerns. While the rest is actually fairly generic, that is, these are capabilities that are exposed by Envoy. So, for example, capturing that, hey, where you want to drop the filter, or is it in inbound or outbound, or basically those kind of things. Or in fact, Istio also just generates those protos from this configuration, and then obviously after some changes, it sends to onward filter, so onward proxy. So one thing that could be of concern is that we are stepping up and taking some of the responsibilities that IDD control plane should have been taking.
Good. Anybody else have comments? Some of it is a little some of this stuff will take us a little while to get really comfortable with. But yeah, I'll take for my part, Utkarsh, I'll take a second look, because this is the first time I was looking. I think in the example, did you use rate limiting as an example?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good, yeah. Always good to put examples in like that, because it always makes things real. To the extent that you use one, we need to use a few, because then it helps make sure that we're not being myopic in the design. So, okay, Meghana, you up next.
Yes. So I added the feature for adding the. I'm so sorry about the noise. Yes. So few issues are closed regarding like patterns and applications and filters. The basic one is added, and I completely forgot about the special one. I'll be working on it now. I'm so sorry. It's driving on for so long. I'll work on it. I took up other issues. I was working on that. So, and I'm sorry about that. I'll work on it and update you on that.
Sure. Yep, no problem. And the special one being the github.com consideration?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I wonder too what it should do. Or like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even I need some more info on how it should work. So
good, cool. Okay, well then good. So that should tell you that you didn't miss an expectation. Because
yeah.
Okay, good. But to conclude on your iterative delivery, which is fantastic, is just a reminder is that if when people are in either applications, filters, or patterns, that these three things are types of content, if you will, is users can bring their own, or Meshry can supply them seed content. If users want to bring their own, there's this upload URL, and people can. Good. So good. There's small iterative things we can do here as well. There's something nice being explored here in Meghana's UI, and that is, small outline in a blue, and the font is a little bit. There's some small items that are different that are worth discussing on a different call, or like separately. There's maybe that we begin to highlight the fact that there's a need for some common components, and some of that common componentry, if you will, is a small info icon, or like the small little question mark icon. It's like import URL here, or import using URL. Great, okay. And I was going to import an application because that's the page that I'm on. Okay, so like part of the questions I might have as a user is like, what if it's behind? What if it's protected? Can I provide credentials? And no, since I don't see that. But if I give it just a directory, like, or can I import multiple at the same time? Can I do a bulk import, or does it? Will it refresh the import every so often, or like, I don't know, just some of these are silly questions that I'm coming up with. But the point being is that, oh, at some point it would be ideal if we take this modal component and we begin to, build out common functionality in the modals that we reuse, such that something like like on this modal, there's no X to close it, and that's because you can click to just dismiss it. I don't know if that's universally the same, and I don't know, to the extent that we would use an info or a question mark, that's not universally the same. And so Megan, like even in advance of having the discussion about github.com as a special use case, those items that I just mentioned, it would actually be helpful if you drove.
Yeah, I actually used the model that is already there. So I just worked with that. I'll be adding the info icon and the close button, right? Those come in handy.
Yeah, if I can't even remember if the close button is there for the, but the point being is like, whether it is or isn't, like, yeah, you driving and collaborating with Nitish, Karthik is probably the best, but is driving commonality across the interfaces.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Good. There's a spec to review here, and this is somewhat in depth. So just before we get to it, Gaurav, do you want to speak to bulk deleting?
Yep, that was merged last week, I think, and currently I'm pasting the link to the PR that was merged because currently I'm not having my system with me. And I also fixed that thing for the performance as well. And if you are running machinery currently, you can have a look from there as well.
Okay, wait, I missed the second part of what you said. You said if I'm running a meshery, what?
If you are running machinery, you can directly delete sample of patterns or filters.
And in good, yeah, I did test this.
Yeah, application also.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to delete. Well, I guess this one's fine. Deleting this would be fine. Hold on. Ooh. But you were just saying, okay, so Gaurav, you were just saying, hey, if you want to test it out, you can delete a couple at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, there are multiples in the patterns you can try from there.
By the way, small verbiage, I don't know, I don't know if you're tracking this as a bulk delete or not, but if you are, then we would just change this to these.
Okay.
But actually, what's an interesting takeaway as well is that the check marks, I don't see them in the background. So it's like, do I want to delete these? Well, which ones was it again? No, I'm not. So this is 1 of 10 delete. And then it's like they disappear from the table immediately.
Yep, and but when we hit no, it will reappear again.
Okay. And so, yeah, this, so did you see part of the issue is like, hey, we wouldn't want to remove them from view. And 2,
And that thing should also be visible in the background.
Yeah. The other thing is that would drive a lot of confidence and comfort for the user is if we list the names of each of the content files to be deleted. It's like, if it said, are you sure you want to delete these? Untitled 1, untitled 2, like parent GG untitled.
Okay, I got it. You're saying that getting the pattern name in that delete mode itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be really nice. And confidence inspiring. And like, yeah, you could even arguably eliminate the need to show them as checked in the background. because that's what the user, because the only reason that it bugs me that they're not in the background is because I'm like, ooh, well, I thought I did, but I'm not sure. Like you're asking me because this is a serious thing. So I want to seriously double check. It's like, well, I don't see them checked. Okay. And then you're not telling me what I'm going to delete. So it's like, no, I'm not comfortable. Okay. Okay. But if I do just the one, I think it's just, okay, it still asks me, okay, you want to delete this one? Well, again, ooh, yeah, same behavior, right? So.
Yep, I got it as per the user experience. It should be there.
Nice. Okay, good. And you hit the deadline too. Congrats. Nice work. That's good. Okay. Any feedback for Gaurav? Before we head into this and kind of get lost for 5 minutes talking about this, it'd be good to tee up what we're going to look at next week. Gaurav, if you're in here, I think you might have a couple items to follow up on. Soham, if we've given consideration to what these might do, it might be reporting back on kind of where mesh map landed with respect to some of these items. And so
I didn't get you exactly.
Oh yeah,
What do you mean
if we kind of want to try to get next week's topics lined up. And so
yeah, I'll just type them over there.
And one thing for the, you can go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was asking for the similar kind of a thing, functionality for configuration of filters that we have in Meshmap itself. So can we have a similar thing that we currently having in the patterns for configurations, because we obviously need that thing in the filters as well.
So the capability that you're referring to, is it this right here?
Yeah.
Yep. So this works for patterns. Okay, good. But then, having it for applications, that makes sense.
For filter.
And then
because somehow we will be configuring the filter.
Yeah. I don't know. And that's because like, I just, I don't know. I think so. I think that makes sense. Does anyone have confidence that makes sense? To have a similar configurator like this, but for filters? So Soham or Utkarsh, so you guys are, I guess Utkarsh.
Yeah, for me, I don't see, but yeah, Utkarsh's opinion would be better.
I'm also not sure, because I think right now we do generate pattern, but it's not as direct as in case of application or in case of obviously patterns. So if we do allow them to, I mean, what would they actually be? Would they be just getting a form, a single form? Because they cannot be more than one entries if it's just a filter, because it's just a filter. So I'm not sure actually.
Gaurav, the answer is that probably that's probably so. But in the meantime, yes, it is the case that is desirable for applications.
Okay.
So Gaurav has a couple items. Meghana, if you don't mind kind of filling in a couple of the items you're going to follow up on modals. And,
yeah, sure. And there's one more thing. I actually need some URL examples for adding the filters and patterns and all. Because initially what happened was I used a random URL validator that I found online, and I checked it with that. Then I changed it to the one that we already have in the direct, like in our source code. So I didn't get a chance to check after that. So I need a sample filter. URLs.
Good. Okay.
Are these URLs that you've shared?
Yeah.
So,
I was just looking for one of those myself. Like there's a repository of awesome filters. I just don't know that we have any binaries built and published. So I'm not, it's a question for me as well. Does anyone
Yeah,
else?
I posted one link for service mesh patterns, which has currently 2 patterns. One is Istio filter pattern and book info pattern, I believe. Yes. I am not sure exactly.
should I just try pasting one of the URL from here itself, like GitHub? Like 1 second, I just like something like this. Should I share some, like should I paste this URL in chat? Something like this.
Yeah. With one tweak. Here's the slight tweak.
Yeah, this will give you the raw content.
I think that works well for a pattern. And then, but for just a filter like this, this is an example here of URL that could be used for a filter. Let's see if this, okay, good, yeah. So here's I'll put this into the meeting minutes because I know it can be helpful for others.
The first one is pattern, right? The second one is a filter.
Right.
Like the chat box.
Right. Good. Something else. Okay. So we only have a couple of minutes left. We won't go through the remainder of this spec. What I'll say about this is that, so last time Nivendu had taken us through a draft of a specification for how to bundle pattern, like useful filters, patterns, and applications into Meshry itself, so that when people deploy Meshry, it's not just a bunch of empty tables with them asking the same questions that Meghana is asking, which is like, okay, great, where do I get some of these examples? Like where can I, it'd be much more helpful if Meshry just had this stuff built in. And so this spec has been rewritten with that goal in mind of identifying the fact that there are, that Meshry is going to want to come pre-bundled out of the box with some content, some value, some value inside of it. And that content comes by way of filters, patterns, applications. And so we are, I think the entire thing is good for everyone to review. All of this has been rewritten, is good to go, good to comment on. Where the rubber meets the road in terms of beginning to execute on bundling of these things. Yep, I believe that the implementation that's described here is also good to go. It doesn't specify all the details, but it says that what we're going to want to do is when Meshry server is built, as it's going through the workflow of being built, that would also fetch patterns and filters from like the URLs that we were just describing, and pull in those artifacts into the, in this case, into the local provider. And that there would be a collection of those that are just available out of the box. Outside of just the literal fact of like retrieving that content and pulling it into the workflow, is that the workflow or Meshry itself, it needs to self-register. So when Meshry server spins up, it does a few initialization routines. And one of those can be looking to its local Docker image, like if Meshry server is running in a Docker container, And within that same image is, a file system that has stuff like seed content. And so it can just have this initialization routine that when it starts, it can look to its local file system. If it finds any seed content, to just go ahead and invoke its own APIs to register. So instead of registering by URL, like it registers by URI, meaning it registers by file path. And that's the proposal. And so this is actually ready, I think, to change into a GitHub issue and begin to iterate on. And so that's actually an open call for people that are on this call to begin to refine this some, to comment a little bit and maybe get more specific about this approach. So some names come to mind as to who might start to do that. Is this of interest to anyone? We all know what happens next, right? It's like, there's a couple of names that come to mind as individuals that may want to begin to dig in here. You're all welcome to, who else do we have on the call? And yeah, so think about this if you would. I guess the thing that we'll put for next week, next week's topic is, like, I guess I'll put this here as the goal of having converted this to an issue and having spoken with a few people to make sure that there's enough detail in there that we can start to iterate on that. It's probably multiple people, right? Somebody may be working on a workflow to check out the content, bring it into the build time. Someone else maybe to work on Meshry's server to say, hey, when it starts up, the server starts, that it would have this initialization routine. Yeah, there's already an API in Meshry to import by URI or to import by file system path that's already supported. And so Meghana, that's actually a really good thing to just take a quick look at. When we're importing filters by URL, Meghana, is this also capable? So the other thing we might want to consider is that we want to allow someone to upload from their local file system. That's actually a really good next step, is to have a browse button as well.
You mean combining both of them, or like
yeah, that in the same modal, like if what's really being done is like they're importing import filter, and they can either paste in a URL or they can click browse to identify and upload. So it's like,
then we can remove that. Like we can just keep one button there, right, in the toolbar. Okay. So we can have single button and maybe give two options inside a single module. Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I totally, yeah, I forgot that this is here, right here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't, let me retract the stuff I just said. Like maybe there's, I don't know, maybe it's better if they're combined. I don't know, but it's not worth doing work on it until it's better thought through. Like, yeah, right now we do have both. Okay, got it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments? Gaurav, will you go ahead and add your items for next week if you would?
Sure, I'll have.
Okay. Do we miss anybody? We're all good? There's a long list of things to do here. So if If you need something, just ask. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Same time next week. Talk to everybody soon. Talk to you all later. All right. Bye. 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 All.
Bye.